Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Selling Jesus podcast. Today's guest is Rich Craig, my friend, the pilot. Today we get to hear his journey to certainty of eternity. Rich, I want to thank you for joining the show today and sharing a little bit of your story with us. Could you start by telling all the listeners just a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So as you said, my name's Rich Craig. I'm a dad of two, awesome kids. I think I'm spoiled as a dad. My kids are just amazing, and I brag on them all the time. I'm a husband, my wife Carol. We've been together for going on. Oh, guess we've been married for 14 years now. Um, and she's great. She really helps me in my walk with Christ. Um, I am work full time for Boeing. I have a business on the side, doing aerial photography, and also just ground photography, video, things like that. I am still in the Navy Reserves. I've been in the Navy going on 18 years in the Navy, but I had a break there. I was out for about 6 years, so I joined the Navy right out of high school. And I'm still doing that, trying to finish my time in the Navy, get my 20 years in. And just other than that, try and stay involved. I keep myself busy, sometimes out of my own control, but, I'm always busy doing something, just trying to spend time with the family, just improve myself any way I can, and just live my life every day for God, knowing that he's the reason I'm here and the reason that I have the ability to do what I do. So I just try and give back every day and just live for him.
Awesome. So you've been married for 14 years. How much, and we'll get into this in a little bit, but how much of your 14 years have you guys been serving Christ together? Did you come together knowing Christ already, or did you guys come to Christ sometime later after you were married?
Well, that's kind of a funny story, actually. The way we came to Christ, and on my and I'm just going to say up front as a little disclaimer here, I'm bad on dates and years. So is my family and my friends listen to this, they're going to be like, that was 7 years ago, not 10 years ago, whatever. So just as a little disclaimer, but so we have been we came to Christ. I guess I wouldn't say we fully came to Christ as a couple until I guess it's been, I'm going to say, about 8 or 10 years ago at the church we're at now. But when we met, I was a Christian. I was going to church at a little church. I lived in Lemoore, California, when I was active duty in the Navy, going to a First Baptist church. And when I met Carol, she was actually Catholic. So, and I told her, hey, I go to church on Sundays. I invited her to go with me, and she was, like I said, she was Catholic, so she was going to Catholic church, and she says, all right, well, I'll come to your church and, check it out, and then you come to my church. And I'm like, okay, well, I've been to Catholic church, and I knew that really wasn't for me. So she came to my church, and, she loved it. She'd never seen anybody clapping in church, raising their hands. The Holy Spirit just filled her, and needless to say, we never made it to her church. I had her, she was hooked on the churches I went to, and that's where we continued to go. It wasn't until we moved back to St. Louis. My grandparents actually attended the church I'm at now, and we started going to. They invited us there, and we just went, and it was just you could tell it was the right place to be. It was just the place for us. The Holy Spirit just filled us. I could tell that the Holy Spirit was in that church and the people there. So we started attending there, but we weren't totally committed. We weren't full time. We had our life outside of Christ, I wouldn't say outside of Christ, but our life outside of church always took priority. So there was, things would come up on the weekend. We would go to Lake of the Ozarks, so we would go do things on the weekend, which always took priority over church. And then I guess it was a couple of years later, we finally decided, we talked and we said, hey, we really need to commit to going to church. We need to make that the priority. instead of these other things that come up, and more or less excuses not to go to church, I think is really what they were. But, Carol and I talked and we said we need to make church the priority. We need to get involved. We need to make sure we're going to church instead of doing these other things, right? If there are things that can be put off until another weekend or something. So that was when we really, as a couple, decided to really commit 100% to church as a couple. I mean, I have my own story too, I think, as far as what really made me to take the step, but we may get into that in a little bit.
We definitely will, and we'll probably cross this storyline again, and we'll be able to skim across it a little bit. But I thought it was interesting how you mentioned that your wife Carol is a big part of your growth, and I do think that's important in our marriages and our relationships. The Bible actually talks about do not be unequally yoked, and just that support structure we have within our own family. And I was just kind of curious how that brought you along your path in the journey. And again, we'll learn a little more about that. Before I go much further, I do want to thank you for your service to our country. It's something that is important, and I appreciate your time with now the Navy Reserves, and I know that you've passed that passion on to many others in your family, so I want to thank you for that. And I also want to dive into briefly your side business, because I know that's something that you're passionate about. You and I talk business quite a bit. Tell me a little more about this side business and how you got into it.
Yeah, well, it was something that, I had a passion. I wanted to do something, right? So I wanted to better myself, right? I wanted to make money for myself, excuse me. And, but I didn't know what that was. I didn't know what that looked like as far as what to do. I mean, I've researched all kinds of different businesses, different entrepreneurial opportunities, different things to do. I had one business in mind that I was really wanting to do, but then I got to looking at, the capital, how much was it going to cost? And I just I can't afford that. I'm not going to put my family in debt like that. So I moved on from that, and I just started praying about as far as what's the path for me? I mean, is this even the right thing? I mean, is starting my own business even what God has in store for me? Is that his plan? And so I just gave it to him, and I started praying about it. And I bought a drone just for the fun, just to fly, have some fun with it. And and as I was praying about it, I came down in my office one day, and my drone's sitting in front of my desk. And I sit down at my desk, and then I start, looking online and stuff. And I come to find out that the FAA is starting to roll out regulations for doing commercial drone use, for flying drones commercially, making money, doing whatever. And I said, well, man, that's something I could do. It's something, I enjoy doing it. I have fun flying the drones. I think it's an up and coming market, aerial photography and videos and things like that. It's something my son likes to do. I can do it with him, which was a really big factor in my business. This is something that, I may not pass it on to him because it may not be something he's interested in doing, but it's something that as he's growing up, and now that my daughter's living here with me, as a family, we can do it. I mean, we've been out flying together. We just went out, I don't know, a few months ago, the whole family, and we took all the drones out, and we went to a big field, and we all flew together. We were training each other and showing each other how to do it, and it was just a cool family thing that we did. So I launched my business in July of 2016, and it's been going steady. It's not, I'm not killing it, as you would say, but it's sustaining itself, which is one thing, I want to make sure it does. I do not want to have to use personal finances or personal budget to support my business, and I haven't had to yet. So it's sustaining itself, and it's going good, and we're still having fun at it. I don't get to get my son out as often as I would like, just because, he's in school and things like that, but he's learning it, and he's seeing what I'm doing, and it's going really well.
So when people ask you what you do, Rich, do you kind of smile and say, I'm a pilot?
Yeah, I like to say drone pilot, because in my opinion, I think that's even more exciting, to be a drone pilot.
Here's my cheap plug, everyone. If you're interested in having some video work done through the use of drones, maybe you are a Christian artist out there and looking to do a video, maybe you own a company and would like to do a commercial, there's no better guy than Rich Craig, and so you reach out to him and let him know, and he and I definitely will appreciate it.
I
Rich,
appreciate it, Scott. Thank you.
not a problem. We're not here, though, to talk about your business completely. We are here to talk about
Okay.
your story and how you came to Christ, and I appreciate you taking this time to share that with us today. As always, I find the best place to start is just our upbringing, our life, and how life was as a child. And can you go into your upbringing a little bit, but always specifically, was Christ a part of it? Was church a part of your life? And just tell us, bring us up through that time.
Yeah. So a little crazy. I think I considered myself as looking back on it now. I consider myself, I guess, a part-time Christian, and I think that kind of poured into my life after I moved out. But basically, so my parents were really young when I was born. So I wouldn't say really young. I mean, they were in. My mom had just graduated high school. My dad was still in high school. They were both 18. So they were, I mean, too young for to have a kid. So I ended up living with my grandparents, my mom's mom, and actually her stepdad, which I called them Grams and Pops, was who I was raised by. So I lived with them, which was completely fine. I mean, they loved me like their own. Just a great. I mean, I learned so much from both of them, but they were not Christians. So then, flip of the coin, my dad's grandparents are actually the ones that invited me to the church that I go to now. So obviously they were Christians. So I kind of had a split Christian life, right? So I lived with my Grams and Pops, and just seen so much in that family, in that household growing up, that would just blow your mind. And then when I would see my dad on the weekends or during the summer, I was with them and I was going to church. We actually went to a little church up in Limay, a Nazarene church. So that's where I was introduced to God, was at church with them. So I always kind of had that ever since I was little, and I knew any better. I knew God. I believed in God just from going to Sunday school and having that poured into me there. But then I would come home to my Grams and Pops, and I never lost it, right? I mean, I always believed in God. It's not like they were, my Grams and Pops were turning me against God. I mean, and so they never tried to do that. It's just the life they were living wasn't a Christian life, right? I mean, it was very, very violent, never towards me. It was always towards each other. I mean, and it was always alcohol induced. I mean, I seen, my pops, I mean, when there was no alcohol involved, he was the best, husband to my grandma. I mean, he loved her to death. I mean, he was buying her things, taking her on vacations, treating her right. I mean, talk to her right. But then as soon as you induce the alcohol into the situation, which was quite often, it completely flipped, not just for him, but for her. I mean, she would get violent. I mean, and just together, you get those two alcohol induced individuals together, and it was really bad. I mean, there was, of course, the physical fights, the verbal abuse, and I was there for it all. I lived it. I lived there. I seen it, and it was just for me. I would just escape to my room and kind of put my headphones on and, kind of live in my own world there for a while that was going on. But like I said, it was never towards me. I mean, they loved me like their own son, and treated me very well. And like I said, I learned a lot from them. So I don't, it wasn't the right thing to do, but I don't hold any of that against them, I guess, as far as how they raised me, because like I said, I think all of it also helped me in my upbringing, in my future as I moved out of that house. I remembered seeing that stuff and said, hey, I'm never going to do that, right? I'm never going to beat my wife or hit my wife or be mean to my wife, things like that. So, but then, like I said, on the flip side, then I would go to my grandparents on my dad's side, and it was completely opposite. I mean, they were very, very Christian. I mean, go to church. I mean, neither my grandma or my grandfather on that side, they didn't cuss. It was always, we'd go to church on Sunday, come home after church, everybody would have, the whole family would come over, we'd have Sunday dinner, just like you see on, all the TV shows, right, of all the perfect families. That's kind of how it was over there. So I really had a complete 180 in lifestyle growing up like that.
Rich,
yeah,
I got to interrupt with a question here. I think this,
sure.
You have two extremes of lives that you are seeing and observing as a child. And
Mm-hmm.
if there's one thing I've come to learn as an adult, no matter how good a family looks, every family has issues. So I don't know if there is even such thing as a normal family. But as a
Right.
child and a youngster watching this, two different perspectives, did you ever start leaning toward, wow, this is a normal family, this is not? I guess what I'm asking, with Grams and Pops, was that your normal, and did you think that every family was like that? Or because that was the environment you were in and maybe you longed for a more stable environment, did you think that every environment was like your other set of grandparents who, as you said, is kind of more very, very Christian? Where was normal for you, and how did you process that as a youngster?
I think normal was, so I definitely didn't think that, the Grams and Pops lifestyle was normal. But I knew, like you said, I knew the other, my grandma and grandpa on the other side of the family. I mean, I didn't think that was more normal, but, I think even as a young kid, I knew better that, there's no perfect family, right? So I think for me, it was kind of a happy, I knew there was a happy medium there somewhere. And I wasn't living in that happy medium. Like you said, I was living from one extreme to the other. So I wouldn't say that I thought either one of them was normal, but I think somewhere in between was probably my normal and what I assumed was normal. Which is kind of where I try and live now, right? I mean, everybody, wants to be the perfect family, but I just don't think that's realistic. So I try and make my family normalness, right? Kind of in between, but more on the my grandma and grandpa on my dad's side, more on that side of the coin, right?
Kind of what I hear you say, and again, this is one of these conversations where I actually know you. I
Hmm.
think what you're saying is your family values are very Christian, but you also try to be very transparent and vulnerable that life is not perfect and that you're not a perfect father and that there are still issues and things that you're working through and growing through. Is that a correct statement?
Oh yeah, I mean, very true. I mean, yeah, like I said, nobody's perfect. I'm not the perfect father. All I can do is I can strive to be, and just try and do, where God leads me every day. Um, but yeah, to claim that, that I'm a perfect dad would not be true whatsoever. And I think not just in fatherhood, but I think just in life in general. I mean, I realize that I'm not perfect and I probably never will be. I mean, there's things that every day that, that I struggle with that, I just got to rely on God for. And it's good to know that, now where I'm at now, I have the faith that, hey, he's there for me regardless, no matter what I do. Right. Which wasn't always there for me before. I didn't think that before, but now, I guess what I'm trying to say is it's okay for me now to know that I'm not perfect, but I have God with me, which is perfect, so he's always there with me.
Absolutely. Well, getting back to the story to keep it going, I know that many of us, even in our adult life, we do carry the baggage and the memories of our childhood and our upbringing. And it sounds like there was, again, some abuse and some difficulties in this upbringing. If you would just keep moving us along this story of moving into, again, teens and adult life, just it's your story, but just keep us moving down the road.
Yep. Yeah. So, So like I said, being raised by my grams and pops, it was a different lifestyle. For me, there wasn't a lot of, there was discipline. So I knew I had, there was things I had to do. I had chores I had to do. They expected certain things of me, but, there wasn't a lot of, I guess I don't want to call it discipline, but overwatch, I guess I would say, right? So I kind of had freedom to do what I wanted to do, within means. So with that said, I had a lot of freedoms. So for me, starting to grow up into a teen, of course, girls, right? Girls became a priority for me. And which would later turn into having sex way too early. That was my motivator. I've never done drugs. I've never smoked, at all. Have drank, and I'll get into that a little bit, but girls was my thing, right? So I started having sex really early, getting out of the house and, going to the girlfriend's house during, after school, things like that. So that's kind of really where I guess my life started to turn, away from Christ during those times. And I guess I'll just kind of caveat, for the rest of my story. I use the analogy a lot, like the song Jesus Take the Wheel, right? So that's kind of the analogy I use for my walk with God before I really committed 100%. So, like I said, as a kid, I was introduced to God in Sunday school and in church. So I always believed in God, but I only had him with me when it was convenient for me, right? So, like I said, to use the analogy, like driving the car, right? So I was in charge. I was driving the car, and God was always there with me. And I knew that, but when I wanted to sin or when I wanted to do something that wouldn't be right in God's eyes, in my kind of analogy, I would kick him out of the car, right? And I'm like, all right, you're out. I'm on my own because I'm going to do this, whatever this may be. And I know you're not going to approve, so you're just not going with me, right? And then later, I'd have to invite him back into the car, right? Because I always knew that he was there for me and with me. But it was only when it was convenient for me, right? So I would kind of invite him back in, and it wasn't until, like I said, until I committed myself to God that I learned that I had to let him be driving the car and not me. So that's kind of where I was then. I believed in God, but when I wanted to go have sex outside of marriage as a young kid when I shouldn't have been, he wasn't with me then, as far as my view goes, as far as my opinion. So that started real early in life, and that just kind of continued on. That became that was my drug of choice, right? That was my satisfaction. And it wasn't really, I hear a lot of guys say, they're trying to get the numbers. How many girls can I have sex with? This, that, the other. That wasn't it for me at all. It was just, I enjoyed it, right? So, people, I talk to people that have done drugs and things like that, and they enjoy it, right? It's a high for them. That was my high. So that continued on. I joined the Navy, like I said, right out of high school, went into the Navy. That lifestyle, as far as the sex and the girls, didn't stop. Started drinking, before I joined the Navy, I was drinking, but, I continued more. And when I joined the Navy and I drank, I wouldn't consider myself an alcoholic, I guess, because I didn't need alcohol. It wasn't like if I wasn't drinking, I was having withdrawals or anything like that. I drank because, again, like sex, I enjoyed it, right? So when I drank, I had fun. It kind of helped me open up, like I think it does anybody. You get a little alcohol in you and you open up, you do things you wouldn't normally do. And for me, I was having more fun when I was drinking. But I could control it if I wanted to. I didn't have to have a drink all the time. So that was kind of my two crutches, right? Or my two drugs of choice was sex and drinking. Married my first wife not too long after I was in the Navy. I think I had just turned 21 when I married my first wife. Met her. She was in the Navy also. Um, and of course we had the same lifestyle, so we were compatible at the time. We had my daughter Sydney, had her with my first wife. Um, and you would think that, now here this would change my way of life, having a daughter. And it did sometimes. Of course I was married now, so I wasn't, the sex wasn't a priority anymore as far as with other girls. I mean, I was always faithful to my wife then, and to my wife now. To both my wives, I've always been faithful. Um, so that wasn't an issue. But just the continued drinking, and my Sydney's mom, she drank also, so that was just something that we did. That didn't work out. Sydney's mom and I didn't work out. So we got divorced, and then kind of continued back, I kind of reverted back to my old ways, right? Um, with the sex and the drinking still. So now here I am, a single guy again, still in the Navy, living out on my own, just doing really what I wanted to do. And like I said, with God, when I wanted him there, and when I didn't need him, or when I didn't want him there, he wasn't there. As far as I was concerned. I mean, I know now he was always there, but looking back on it, there's a lot of times that even though I didn't want him there, he was there for me. And I didn't realize that until, becoming a Christian just within the last, 6 or 7 years. I look back on my life and I see things that happened, see events that I maybe should have never lived through, that I should have not, that should have been a totally different outcome if God wasn't there for me, watching out for me and keeping his hand on me. So looking back now, I see that, and I see all the times that he was there for me, and then really that he saved me.
Rich, I don't see your life at this moment any different than any other human life, any person I've ever spoken to on this podcast or outside of this podcast. I love how you mentioned that girls was really your drug of choice. And I've grown up in the church my entire life, and I would see people chastise certain actions. Let's say drinking or smoking or things of this nature. And I always struggled with it because as I began to mature, I realized that, well, you're chastising this person for their drug of choice when Twinkies seems to be your drug of choice. And I think it's in our human nature that we all have habits, and we all have, really addictions or drugs of choice that draw us in, that call our name. I like how you mentioned your relationship with Christ. In fact, it almost seems to me that you've always had a belief in God, a belief in Christ, but made a conscious decision at certain points that you did not want him a part of your life because the life that Christ would want you to live conflicted with really what you wanted. So you were making decisions based on what you want and God wants. Can you now march me a little further into the story of when did that change? When did you start realizing that, you know what, this isn't working? Maybe this life that Christ wants me to live is better.
Right. So I never had, I guess what I would call that aha moment. I've heard many testimonies, and a lot of people, they can remember the exact day or where they were, when God intervened, right, and said, look, this life that you're living is no longer, this is where we're going forward. And I never had that aha moment, I would say, right? So like I said, I always believed in God. I guess the one thing, like I said, I mentioned earlier, talking to Carol, when as a family, we said we need to really start following God 100%. So that was part of it. The other part is, so my dad, like I said, him and my mom divorced when I was really young, but I've always been real close to both my dad and my mom. Um, and my dad, he lives down near Little Rock, Arkansas now. His job took him down there when I was young, so he's lived down there for most of my life. But and of course he was a Christ follower. And I was there one time. We were visiting there. Carol and I were visiting him, and we were talking about. And I don't even remember how the topic came up. We were talking about funerals, and my dad told me. He says, well, at my funeral, he said, I don't want nobody crying. He said, I want you guys to be partying, having a good time. He says, because I know where I'm going to be, and it's a lot better than where I am now. It's a lot better than earth, right? I know where I'm going to be. And that really just made me think, and I didn't ask him, but I got to thinking about it, and the more, I went over that in my mind as far, I'm like, well, how does he know? How is he so sure where he's going to be when he dies? And that's really what made me, I guess, start opening the Bible, getting in the Word, because I'm like, I want to be that sure, right? I mean, I want to know when when I take my last breath, where I'm going to be. I want to be as sure as my dad is. So I guess, if I had to have an aha moment, right, I guess that would be it, just as far as, that I want to follow Christ, because I want to know, and I do now, I am 100% sure now that, whenever I take my last breath, I'm going to be living eternity with God, and, and I'm good with that now. So, and there was other events earlier that went on, before all this, that kind of gave me a little wake up call, that involved drinking and things like that. But, and they were like, oh, maybe that was a dumb decision. I probably shouldn't have did that. And if I would have been walking with God, that probably wouldn't have happened, things like that. But I guess that conversation with my dad is really my, when I really decided, all right, this is, I want to be as sure as he is. I want to start living the life of Christ, because I want to know with no question in my mind that when I die, I'm going to heaven and I'm going to be living eternity with God. So,
Rich, this is a very interesting topic to me, eternity. Growing up, I feel like the Christian world and the church spoke about eternity often, heaven, hell. And then I also feel that over the years, we've kind of lightened up on that conversation. I think people made fun of those who did the hellfire and brimstone type preaching. And so you've really seen a lot of people just pull back from a conversation of eternity. And I'm not sure that's a good thing. I just throw that out there myself. One aspect about this is, if you read a lot or do any studying on sharing your faith with others, one of the best questions to ask an individual is, are you sure where you would spend your eternity upon death? Or you could phrase it how you would like to. And you said that you were not sure, but it intrigued you that your dad was so sure. I know you can't speak for everyone, but in your opinion, how many people do you think are pondering life after death, even though it might not be spoken about so much?
Oh, I think a lot of people. I mean, because it's such I guess, you'd call it like a magical, people, you talk about heaven and eternity, and it's like this, you can't see it, right? And a lot of people, if you can't see it, it's not real, right? People want to see it, touch it, hold it, feel it, right? To know that it's real. And, heaven, eternity, even God himself, right? I mean, it's, to a lot of people, it's not true, because they can't physically see it, feel it, touch it, right? So I think a lot of people are pondering that. I mean, unfortunately, that's one of my, to kind of go down another little rabbit hole real quick, but so my daughter, she's a fairly new believer. She just moved back here with us in May to go to school here, and she's fairly new. So I've always prayed for her. I've always tried to get her in the Word, but her mom is not a believer like I am, or she's not where I am in her walk with Christ. So she didn't have that growing up with her mom. But that's one thing I told Sydney when she moved here. I said, hey, it's I would like you to go to church with us. I'm not forcing you to, but I would like you to. And I brought up eternity to her. I said, that's important to me because, I know I have a life of eternity, and I want that for my family too, because I don't want to live the rest of eternity without my family. So it's very important to me that both of my kids and my wife are saved, because I want eternity to be forever with all of them. So so to me, I think there's a lot of people, as you asked, I think there's a lot of people wondering about it, and I just hope that through either this podcast or through whatever means necessary, people can make that more real, right? Even though they can't see it, feel it, touch it, it can be like me, and God can pour into them and make them know that it is real. It's a real thing. Eternity is out there, and it is. I mean, it's yours. You just gotta ask for it and go for it, right?
Absolutely. And I just want a side note for all our Christian friends that are listening to this. If you have been one that's fallen victim to reducing the level of conversation when it comes to eternity, I personally would argue that you've been deceived by the enemy, and that it is a conversation that we do need to have with our friends, our family, those around us that may not be following Christ. The reality is, that's what it's all about. Yes, Christ is here with us on earth. Yes, the Holy Spirit walks with us here on earth. Yes, there are many benefits of having that relationship with Christ here on earth. But the end game is really eternity, and we must keep that in the forefront. So I want to use that as encouragement to everybody. Rich's story, to remember that people are pondering life after death, and just like Rich, may be that moment, that question that sets them on the right course. So Rich, we're back on course here. You've made this decision that you want to be sure. I'm assuming this, based on the early part of the story, is a little pre-marriage to Carol, but probably all right around this time frame. So I'll let you keep marching.
Yeah. So got divorced from, like I said, my first wife, and then just kind of life went on. As doing what I wanted to do. Party ended up, drinking, having a good time. So I ended up getting out of the Navy. I met Carol first. I met Carol in 2001, not right before I got out of the Navy. And we hit it off right away. I mean, we had a lot in common. We had Shane before we were married. Just going to lay it out there on the line right now. Had Shane before we were married, which I love him, and I wouldn't do anything different, now. But so Carol and I moved back here. We had my pops, I mentioned earlier. My grandma had already passed away. My pops was not doing well. He had diabetes. He had his leg was amputated, and like I said, he was, for all intensive purposes, he was my dad growing up. He raised me. Not to belittle my biological father, but my pops was very important to me. So it was important for me to get back home. So Carol and I moved back here to St. Louis to be closer to my family, to be with my pops. And that's when we were invited to our church, to Cross Point, for the first time. Actually, the South County Christian Center then, and just started living that life, like I said. I mean, walking with God as it was convenient for us. And it was good to be back here with family. Carol was pregnant with Shane at the time. She was actually the pregnancy, I guess, hormones or emotions, whatever she had going on. She was missing home real bad, so California was home for her. She was missing home. I wasn't real happy with my job here, so I actually ended up taking a job back in California, and we moved right back into the house we lived in before, into Carol's stepdad's house in California, right after Shane was born. So Shane was born here, then we moved. And it's just kind of, I guess, life is normal back there. I mean, we found a church back there. And again, we were going into church as was convenient for us. Um, Lived out there for about a year and a half. My job ended out there, and I said, well, we're going back to St. Louis, right? So we came back to St. Louis. I got a job back here, and it's been here ever since. And it was, like I said, I guess about maybe 9, 10 years ago, like I said, that we really made that commitment to live full on, for Christ and make him a priority, make church a priority, and to get involved. So that's what we did. I mean, we just really, we dug in, we got involved at Crosspoint Church, and doing just as much as we can, sometimes even too much. I actually remember a conversation with you. I don't know if you remember it, but, one time, I had mentioned to you that I really wanted to serve in the youth, right? When you were back there in the youth, but I was involved in so many other things. And you told me at the time, hey, don't stretch yourself thin, right? You don't want to overserve, right? You don't want to be serving too much that you can't give everything that is needed in each of your ministries. And that really spoke to me, because kind of in my life, as you may already have kind of picked up, right? So I work full time. I got a side business. I'm in the Navy. I'm now running the ministry at church. So I make it a habit of stretching myself thin. So to get advice like that, it really means a lot to me, because I think I need more people to tell me that more often. But that's where we are now. I mean, we're ingrained in church. I serve on the safety team there. I'm, on the prayer team. I have my own ministry there, helping widows, which is just another God story that completely happened all about God. I mean, that was all his doing, and nothing to do with me. But that's where we are now. And I mean, we're just living every day, like I said, for God, and doing what, the steps that he directs us. That's what we're trying to do.
Excellent. Well, Rich, I appreciate the story, and more may come up even with these couple questions, but I did write a few questions down through the story. One of them I would like to explore is, back in your early youth, you mentioned how, you knew about God, but you wanted to basically do your own thing. So I believe your exact statement was, hey, God, it's time to get out of the car right now. I'm ready to do my own thing. I'll pick you up a little later.
Yep.
As a more mature Christian, someone who's been doing his best to walk the straight and narrow over the last 8 to 10 years, I think is what you said. What's different? I mean, what's the benefit? What would you tell someone who is still struggling with wanting to do their own thing? You've experienced both. So what is the big difference of really dedicating your life to Christ and really doing it God's way?
Well, I think for me, it's seeing, my eyes have been open now, right? And God's really opened my eyes to see that he was always there, even if I didn't want him there. And also seeing where he was there when I really needed him, when I didn't know it. Like I said, there was times when I drove my car for long distances after having way too much drink, and ending up somewhere and not remembering it. Times like that I shouldn't have survived. But looking back now, I know I did, and the only way I did is because God was there with me. Just times growing up with other events that happened that I shouldn't have survived or lived through. But looking back now as a believer and having my eyes open, it just, I guess I don't, I don't have, like I said, a aha moment to say this is really what opened my eyes. But I think getting in the Word and just having the Holy Spirit pour into my life, just that I can see things differently now, right? So I'm more mature. I know what God has in store for me. I know what he's done for me, which is huge. And it scares me to death now with not just, my kids, of course, but, my family, my friends, to see some of them that are walking the path I used to walk, and know that, I was there, and oh man, yeah, it was a good time, but it wasn't the right place for me that I should have been. It's not the right place that they should be. Um, and I just pray every day that, their eyes can all be opened, um, just like mine were, to see that the life they're living isn't what God has in store for them. And it's not the path that they should be on. So I don't have any really like magical words of wisdom to say, all right, this is what did it for me, other than the fact that it's just, I know it's real. I know it's true. I know that, what I'm doing, is right. And what I was doing back then was completely wrong. So,
If you look at the album cover of Selling Jesus, it says A Journey of Faith, and your story really is a journey. It sounds like your growth, every aspect of it's just been a journey. No one moment, it's just been daily steps that have brought you
hmm
to where you are today. And the reality is, you're still not where God ultimately wants you to be. I'm not where God ultimately wants me to be. So it's just a journey of daily steps. One thing I would
yeah,
ask you, Rich, I think there's a lot of people who would like to know about eternity, would like to follow Christ. Maybe they know about God. Maybe they were raised up in church. Yet at the same time, they do have some drugs of choice that they like, whether it be sex, whether it be drugs, alcohol, whether it be, you name it.
hmm
I think there's a lot of people, though, that feel like they got to clean themselves up first before God will accept them, rather than accepting Christ and saying, I'm moving forward. Can you speak to that person?
yeah, for sure. I mean, God is not. I mean, He doesn't want perfect people. I mean, He wants the broken. Um, so He doesn't require you to be perfect before taking that step of faith. I mean, He is the ultimate fixer, the ultimate healer, right? So when you take that step of faith, then you can clean yourself up. You can be fixed. Um, my daughter struggles with that now. Like I said, she's a fairly new believer, and she doesn't. There's some things in the Bible that is completely new for her, and she's at the point where where a lot of people are, that this this is just a book, right, that I'm reading, and did this stuff really happen? Is it true? It's not, like I said earlier, it's not real. I can't touch it, feel it, you know. So is it really true? And a lot of people, and that's where she's at. She doesn't, and I try and instill in her, but she's not to the point. She doesn't know. She's like, well, can I be a Christian? Can I be a believer? Can I give my life to God before believing all this and before living, the life? And I try and tell her that no, you can. I mean, you can give your life to God. You can say the sinner's prayer. You can be baptized and not be perfect. Um, but I also tell her it's in her own time. It's not for me to decide. It's not for me to say, okay, you know, now's the time for you to get baptized. Now's the time for you to give your life to Christ. That's all in her time and in God's time. God will tell her when it's right. And just like everybody else that may be listening, I mean, you're going to know, at least I did, when it's the right time. Excuse me. I mean, there's no one that can tell you, all right, now it's time to be baptized. All right, so you have to make that decision on your own, and it's only, in my opinion, it's only God led, and it's only Holy Spirit led that you can be ready. But ultimately, like you said, He don't want the perfect people. I mean, He wants people that are broken to come to Him and just get on their knees and say, I'm broken. I'm a sinner. I want to repent for my sins and live life for you. So that's what He wants. He doesn't want you to be perfect, because honestly, if you waited till you're perfect to give your life to Christ, it would never happen.
Never will. And I refer to the Christian walk a lot as a home renovation. I've bought a few homes off foreclosure and had to renovate them. And one of the things that I find really unique about the process is when you buy this house, it's a complete mess. And so At first, it's easy. You're like, oh, yeah, I just got to clean out all this trash. Oh, yeah, if I fix this wall here and if I paint the walls and put in new flooring, this place is going to look great. And you do that. And what's ironic is the moment you do that, then you see the next level of issues in that home. And then you fix all those issues. And Rich, honestly, it feels like it just keeps going on and on and on. And it really relates to me in the Christian walk. It's one of those things that early on you're seeing big stuff and you just need to walk the walk. And quite frankly, once you make it through the big stuff, the Holy Spirit's going to reveal the next level. And we're just never going to achieve perfection. It's just a daily walk. And then my encouragement to, maybe someone who's listening and they're in this spot right now, being a parent has really helped me understand God. There's nothing you can do that's going to make him stop loving you. Now, you can reject his
Right.
gift. You can reject the life that he's offering, but that's your decision, not his. God is not sitting up in heaven with an eraser in the book of life, erasing your name every single time you make a simple mistake or even a big mistake. He loves you, and all he wants is your diligence and your try. That's all he's asking for. And when we remember that, it just takes a lot of pressure off us and allows us to really receive his grace. And that's what salvation's all about, is true grace.
Yep, that's very true.
Rich, I'm down to 5 minutes, and I want to ask one final question. I wrote it down very early.
Sure.
You had talked about your early life as a youth. Um, Starting to have sex way too early was your direct statement.
Hmm.
And you have a son that is in his, I'm going to call him early teen years, early to mid teen years. And I know there is no book out there on parenting, and there's no book, there might be a few books on Christian parenting, but I'm not sure there's a way that helps us know what to do with each individual child. But speak to the parents right now. You walked a path. I know it's not the path you want your son to walk. What are some things you're doing to help him walk a potentially different path?
Right. And Scott, it scares it scares me to death that that he would be me, right? At that age. It's just, as a father, it just, I pray about it every day. It just scares me to death that he could go down that path, and that is definitely not what I want. So, I mean, I just try and instill in him. I mean, I try and keep him in the Word, keep him in church. Even at our church, not too, for quite a while, we had a group. It was called TNT, and it was just a bunch of men that would meet. And even he was quite a bit younger then, and I would bring him to those, and it was mainly for men. And he would kind of sit in. We would eat and things like that, and he would sit in there and he would eat with us, and then he would usually go play basketball or go do something. But for me, it was just keep getting him around Christian men, right? That would know him, that he could see living the Christian life as a man should be living it, and just see that. And I just try and do that for him. I try and be a role model now for him. I try and make sure he has other role models in his life um, that are good role models, good Christian role models, not only men but friends too. I think he gets real aggravated with me sometimes because there's certain friends or people at school, and that we're like, no, you're not hanging out with this person, right? They're not a good influence. They're not a good person for you to be involved with. And um, and I think I even mentioned to him the other day, I said, I know that the decisions that I'm making for you, you're not a fan of. There's things that we have to do as parents that don't make us popular with our kids. Um, but ultimately, he will see in the future, hopefully, that I'm only looking out for his best interest. Um, so I pray for him every day. I pray for both my kids and my family every day, just that they would continue to follow Christ, to walk the walk. And I know there's going to be struggles, but and they're going to fail. I mean, that's just the way it is. I mean, like I said, nothing's perfect. No one's going to have a perfect life, but that when they do fail or when they do struggle, that they always have God to rely on. And I just try and instill in him all the time that, when you come across these struggles in your life, whatever they may be, you're not alone, regardless of where you're at, who you're with. I mean, God is always there with you, and all you have to do is just, give it to him, even if, you don't have to close your eyes and get on your knees and pray, right? If you're having an issue in school or whatever the case may be, you can just pray in your head to yourself, to God, but he is going to be there, and he is going to hear you, and he is going to listen. So as a father, and just talking to other parents out there, I mean, we just have to realize that our kids, just like us, they're not perfect. They're going to fail. They're going to, things are going to happen, but we just have to be there for them when they get back up. We have to try and do everything we can do to keep them from failing. But, again, I don't think that's possible either. I mean, I think there's going to be times when they fall. We just got to help make that fall a little softer when they hit the ground, and then be there to pick them back up again.
Be like Christ and just keep loving them is pretty much
Right.
it. And I like what you said. Keep them around godly examples, talk to them openly, and love them. And I think that's about all we can do. I want to encourage parents. I've either read it from a book or heard it on Focus on the Family episode with James Dobson, and he just reminded all parents that the reality is every individual has free will. And all we can do is raise our children the best that we can. We can love them the best that we can. But we must understand that just like us, they have a free will to make whatever choice they decide to make. It's not your responsibility if they take the wrong direction. If you've done the right things and they take the wrong direction, don't carry that weight. Don't carry the burden. It's simply free will. But keep loving them. As Rich said, just make their fall a little softer and keep showing them the right way. Rich, our time is up for the day. I thank you for sharing your story. I thank you for sharing with all of us. I know it's going to impact some lives out there as someone's going to relate to this. Just want to thank you for taking your time to give of yourself and make a difference for the kingdom.
Awesome. Thank you, Scott. And thank you for doing this. It's really important. I mean, I've listened to all the podcasts, and it's just so important to get the word out there. And like I've always said, even if what I say or what I do changes one life, I mean, it was all worth it, and I think this podcast is exactly the same.